And now it is 2 p.m. in Copenhagen, where I am. We have officially opened this webinar on the upcoming visit of Ursula von der Leyen to Greenland and the opening of an EU office in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. As you know, on Thursday, Ursula von der Leyen will visit the Faroe Islands, and on Friday she will be in Nuuk in Greenland to officially open an European Commission office in Greenland, the first actual office of the EU Commission in the entire Arctic region. Ursula von der Leyen is traveling, of course, with the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, and we are here to explore what is really at stake at these events. What are the interests of the EU in the Arctic, and why is Greenland, who's not even a member of the EU, so interested in closer ties with the EU? What role do the raw materials in Greenland play, and how does all this relate to the conflict with Russia? There are many questions about, and my name is Martin Breum. I'm a journalist. I follow developments in the Arctic, and we have a splendid panel of speakers with us, and I will present them to you briefly. We will start off in Brussels with Thomas Baert, who's a full-time member of Ursula von der Leyen's cabinet. He's a special advisor on trade and international partnerships, and Thomas, as I said, is with us from Brussels. Then we are very fortunate to have with us the minister from Greenland, Naja Nathanielsen, Minister of the Greenlandic government for raw materials, business, trade, justice, and gender equality. She will meet von der Leyen when von der Leyen is in Nuuk on Friday. And from Ottawa, from Canada, also today with us, Jari Vilén, Finland's ambassador to Ottawa since September last year. And before that, Jari was Finland's ambassador for Barents and Northern Dimension, and he was also the senior advisor for Arctic policy at the European Political Strategy Center, an advisor to the former head of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, on Arctic affairs. So quite a handful there. And with me in the studio, of course, Per Haugaard, who is head of the EU Commission's representation in Denmark. There will be ample time for questions, but I'll ask you, when you ask questions, you can do so in writing, in the chat function of this webinar. You'll have to write your name there, and please also make sure you write your affiliation, the media you work for. But we will have the presentations, and then I'll tell you exactly when there is a window for written questions. Thomas Baert, let me turn to you in Brussels. Please give us your analysis of why we see this increase in interest in the Arctic von der Leyen, and also of the EU Commission at large. What is so interesting in Greenland and the Arctic that the EU Commission now goes to these extents?
Much, Martin, and it's really great to be with you all to discuss this trip that is finally happening. I must say I'm extremely excited that we are about to take off on this journey, and all the preparatory work that we've been doing for the last weeks and months even is now bearing fruit. So very excited about that. I'll start maybe from the sort of global context before we zoom in on some of the very specific issues for this important visit of President von der Leyen. I don't have to tell you, I think that we live in extraordinary times, in geopolitical times, and this is a time where partnerships come at a premium. I think around the world, whether you're big or whether you're small, whether you're far or whether you're close, it is extremely important for the European Union to be close to its partners, to partners that share the same values, that have similar interests, and that fundamentally want to come together to work on solutions for some of these global issues, whether they have to do with security or with the environment, or specifically in this case also with the Arctic. So the visit of President von der Leyen to Greenland and to the Faroe Islands should really be seen almost as a geopolitical visit, and the fact that she is very attached to being close to our partners, regardless of their size and how far or how close they are. I think part of the message that the president will want to share with both Greenland and the Faroe Islands is that even if you're not part of the European Union, you're part of Europe. You're part of one family that we are, and that we are very attached to as we are confronted with some of these challenges. Now, with that comes, I would say, a large degree of appreciation for what Greenland has done in confirming its own orientations in this geopolitical world, in aligning with a lot of the sanctions against the Russian aggressor that we have taken and others have taken, and in making sure that we can support the rules-based international order that we are so attached to. So I think that is a good time to make that commitment, to recommit to this cooperation, and in that context to really see what potential our partnership has. I think in both cases, Faroe Islands and Greenland, but I appreciate we're speaking more about Greenland here, we really want to take our relationship to the next level and to make sure that we talk about the widest range of issues that we see. Very often we tend to focus, or we tend to think about very specific issues, whether it's fisheries or maybe some of the specific Arctic issues. But here we're not focusing on one issue. We're really focusing on an entire relationship and on making sure that that relationship works for both of us in this geopolitical world. And of course, the best example or the best indication of how we want to raise the level of the relationship and unleash that potential is by setting up an office in Nuuk, as you already mentioned to. And I think Per can speak more to some of the, let's say, the operational elements and the practical side of it. But this is really about making sure that we have an office that can speak about the European Union, but that is also fundamentally there, I would say, to listen and to make sure that we keep our ear close to the ground in terms of the issues that are important for Greenland and the contributions that we can make, the cooperation that we can foster through this office, whether that has to do with people-to-people exchanges, with, of course, environmental issues, Arctic issues, but many more issues. So this is really a representation that will cover the full extent of our relationship and look at all the various issues rather than zooming in on one specific domain. Now, if I have to mention a specific domain on which we have been working together and on which we certainly want to further increase our cooperation, it is the area which you already mentioned. It's the area of critical raw materials. Critical raw materials are in great demand around the world, including and in particular to enable what we call the green transition and the digital transition to a twin transition that is particularly important for us here in the European Union, and where, to be very clear, we lack some of the access to some of those materials. So having partners that can process, that can produce, that can mine these critical raw materials is critically important. But we do that fundamentally with a win-win spirit. So we are not going out around the world and look for extracting value. We're there to create value. So it's not an extraction business that we're in. We're really trying to build the supply chains that are useful for us, but the production chains that are also fundamentally beneficial to our partner countries around the world. And that, of course, includes Greenland, who I think has about 27 of the strategic and critical raw materials that we have defined as being critical or strategic in the European Union. So an enormous potential, but it is very much a question now of making that a reality. We are still at a fairly early stage when it comes to the exploration and the investments that are needed. And for that, we have created and we have signed last year in November a partnership specifically on critical raw materials. So for President von der Leyen, it is extremely important now to have this visit on the back of this critical raw materials partnership and to really see how we can make that happen, and how we can deliver on this win-win promise, how we can make sure that European know-how, that European investment, that European values also, the ones that make this a sustainable business, and one that has the full respect for labor requirements, etc., that model is really delivered on. So that is a good example of some of the discussions that President von der Leyen will certainly look to have, while, of course, keen to hear the prospects, the interests, the expectations also from our Greenlandic partners in what they need to make this happen, and how to, let's say, fuel this transition and this critical raw materials partnership more generally. Now, beyond the sort of specific issues like critical raw materials, beyond the bilateral relationship with Greenland, the European Union is, of course, strongly committed to the Arctic, where our objectives are, of course, to preserve the Arctic as a region of peaceful cooperation, mitigate the adverse effects of climate change, and I know the President is keen to also witness some of the impact of climate change in the Arctic and in Greenland in particular, and of course also to promote the sustainable development of the Arctic region in general for the betterment of local communities. So that is a commitment that we have. It is always extremely useful and interesting to have the President see and feel those things with her own eyes, have that discussion, and have a view on how we can indeed position ourselves better and make us more strongly committed to the relationship with Greenland, but also with the Arctic overall. So I would leave it there, Martin, for now in terms of my general introductory comments, but I know there's others that will share their perspective, and of course I'm looking forward to a discussion and your questions. So over to you in Copenhagen.
Thank you very much, Thomas Berg. Thank you very, very much for this very intriguing and very useful introduction. And I was just about to say, Jesus, is he forgetting the raw materials? But you got to it, and you explained to us that that is a key issue for the European Union, and it has been for some years when the talk has been about Greenlandic and European relations. So just one question before we move on. You were almost there, but can you explain to us how the EU may actually make an actual difference when it comes to bringing the minerals out of the ground in Greenland? And a lot of talk has been heard, a lot of conferences has been held over the years, a lot of investments have been made already, but it has turned out to be very difficult to actually bring large-scale mining to fruition in Greenland. It's expensive, there is limited infrastructure, etc., etc. The difficulties are well known. So how exactly is the EU proposing to make a difference, the Commission?
Yeah, no, very, very good point indeed, and happy to go in a little bit more detail there. I think you mentioned a key word there, which is the word infrastructure. Infrastructure and investment is really the starting point of a lot of these conversations, where from a European side, we are committed to bringing the investment and the infrastructure through our own programs. Our lead program is called Global Gateway, of course, our infrastructure investment policy, but also by bringing the private sector to the table. And this year, we will in fact have a business delegation that will come from Europe to Greenland to follow up in a much more concrete manner that presidents and ministers can do this, but to really look at the reality on the ground and assess the needs and make this happen. Now, there's one other part of your question I would like to pick up on, and I briefly mentioned it already, which is what is the European difference? What is the difference that the European Union can make here? And this goes back to the idea that our approach to this investment, let's say, is value driven. So we first and foremost have, of course, the full respect for the host and the partner country that has these raw materials, where we're not looking to just simply, let's say, extract and run. Others around the world are doing this. And I don't want to be silly. I'll name the country of China in particular. This is a model that is particularly followed by them, but also by others. So from our side, the starting point is to say, how can we really develop this in partnership, where we come with investment, we come with know-how. A lot of the companies have the know-how on the extraction side and on the mining side. But then importantly, we want to create value locally. And what that means is that important parts of the supply chain need to stay in the partner country. That includes, for example, processing. So as you move up the value chain from mining to processing, for us, it's very important that we can leave that part of the business also, and we can support that part of the business also in our partner countries in Greenland in this case. And that really makes it a win-win model that is very much driven by these European values in terms of sustainable production and in terms of value creation overall, with the full respect, of course, for local communities, labor standards, and of course, environmental standards more generally.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and very appropriately, we have with us also, as I said, the Greenlandic Minister for Raw Materials, Naja Nathanielsen. I'd like to turn to you first, and let me start off by saying thank you very much for taking time. I know you're with us from New York. You're between meetings in New York, and you have taken time out to be participating in this particular webinar. So thank you very, very much for that. It's extremely important that we have you on board to give us your perspective on the opening of the first EU office in the Arctic, which will now finally open in Nuuk on Friday. So thank you for your participation, and the next 5-8 minutes are yours. And I'm sure you will also address some of the issues that Thomas Baird just touched upon. Naja Nathanielsen, welcome. The word is yours.
Thank you, and I will do my best to keep my time. Yes, good morning from New York. I'm not yet between meetings because it's quite early still in the morning. But firstly, I'm grateful that so many are interested in Greenland from a journalistic point of view. And please know you don't need a special seminar to learn more about Greenland or Greenlandic relations. You are always welcome to reach out to the government of Greenland. And I've been promised that contact information will be made available to you after my speech by Martin and his team. So my topic today is critical minerals, business and trade. But the baseline for the webinar is, of course, the upcoming opening of the European Commission office in Greenland. And the office will serve as a local platform for transatlantic cooperation between the European Union and Greenland. And it will build, I think, on already existing and extensive relationships we have with the European Union over decades. We've been collaborating on fisheries, on education and research for many years. So this only builds to that relationship. And within the area of mineral resource, we deepened this cooperation late November last year, as Thomas Baird also mentioned, when we signed the Memorandum of Understanding, focusing on value chains, sustainable value chains from raw materials. And this, I think you asked about it too, Martin, what difference will this make? The Memorandum of Understanding will be supported by a comprehensive roadmap that aims to ensure concrete outcome of this piece of paper, if you will. So it's about benefits on both sides. And it contains points such as revising ESG standards, aligning them, business-to-business meetings, and alignment of taxation issues if there are any discrepancies between the European conception of things and the Greenlandic system. And also the government of Greenland recognizes that we need bilateral cooperation to further the development of our mineral sector. I think you asked about that as well, Martin. How can we move forward? In the European Union, we find a like-minded partner in many regards, and we do have a keen interest in delivering Greenlandic minerals to the European industrial ecosystems where they can be used in the green transition. And as you all know, it's a high intensive market, the green transition for minerals. And I will get back to that in a bit. But in Greenland, we already have high environmental standards. We have an organized labor market, and we are mindful of social impact of projects. And therefore, we think we are also a very good fit for European companies because we are sustainable in our mindset. And we are like-minded on many objectives, such as the green transition and the digital transition. Development of mines, exports of minerals is, of course, an important issue for the diversification of Greenlandic economy. Today, the fisheries is our first and foremost source of income. That will not change for many years. But the mineral sector and tourism is also very important sectors and play an important role for, especially for local communities, where they do make a lot of change in the income profile for local companies, for local citizens in the different municipalities. And I just mentioned before that the green transition does need a lot of minerals. And I think, Thomas, you said that we have 27 out of the 34 critical raw materials listed by the European Union. I think actually it's only 25, but it's still a big chunk. And you can say that besides aluminum and steel, the fabrication of an electric vehicle car demands 6 times more minerals than a combustion engine car. And if we look at fabrication of offshore wind farms, it's 13 times more critical minerals than the fabrication of a comparable gas-fired power plant. I will quickly move on. But having a good resource, I think, is not enough. And this is where it gets a bit interesting, because mining, it's high risk, it's capital intensive, it's long-term investment. And currently, Greenland only have the first part of the value chain. And it's a lot of burden that is put on that first part of the value chain. And it makes the odds difficult for the companies to produce a business case acceptable to investors, especially if you are a smaller company. And in Greenland, many of our mineral projects are driven by smaller companies. So on top of this, the market, I think, as it was also mentioned, for critical minerals is to some extent affected by both protectionism and geopolitical tensions that ask to, you can say, the risk of the investment. So currently, Greenland is raising this matter in different forums. If the Western world wants sustainable, diversified, secure value chains, some of these minerals will need to come from countries that are smaller, like Greenland. We don't have the economic muscles to invest ourselves in the mineral sector. And a lot of strain, as I said, is put on the first part of the value chain. So if a green transition is to made available, there needs to be a helping hand to the first part of the value chain, as I see it. And the price, if it's mined sustainable, will be higher than the current prices that are to some extent, as I said, affected by both geopolitical tensions and protectionism. So there is a way to go to make this a reality as well. And we are very pleased to know and learn that mineral importing countries are mindful of this conundrum as well, and are also looking at de-risking instruments in some form to try to make this happen. And I just, in my last couple of minutes, maybe want to focus a bit on the other part of my portfolio. We have a lot of focus also on hydropower. 67% of our public supply in green energy is supplied by hydropower. And we're looking into commercial projects as well. We are preparing a tender for hydropower project that can be used for commercial scale production of e-fuels and other purposes. Also, we have invested massively with the Danish government in infrastructure, especially airports, and 2 new airports will open in the next couple of years, and in Nuuk and Ilulissat, and this will make Greenland more accessible and also cheaper to visit and do business in. And this especially affects our tourism sector right now, and we are seeing a big raise in that sector. And we are working on a sustainable tourism sector plan that we are also finding quite interesting. So I just want to stop by saying, end by saying Greenland is a wonderful acquaintance. And I think there are many, many possibilities for journalists to dive into this area, both people, business, culture, and other perspectives. And just reach out, please, if you have any questions. We have many, both cultural mediators, government bodies, politicians, our own media, all are very open to answer questions you must have.
Thank you very much, Naja Nathanielsen, Minister for Raw Materials and several other things in the government of Greenland. Thank you for your time, Naja. And ladies and gentlemen, we will share the contact information for the government of Greenland with you through your emails after this meeting. Also, this is the time for you to ask questions directly to Naja Nathanielsen. She will have to leave our webinar before it's finalized. So we will take questions to Naja right at this moment. So if you have a question, please write it in the chat room in your, on your computer, send it to us, and I will have it here on my screen, and I will ask the question on your behalf to Naja Nathanielsen before she has to leave the meeting. Naja, allow me to ask one question while the journalists have a chance to write their questions. You talk of the desire of Greenland to attract foreign investors, European investors, alongside help from the Commission into the mining sector of Greenland. But at the same time, we know that Greenland has now put a moratorium on all exploration for oil and gas, and there is also, let's say, a ban on the mining of uranium. I know that you're interested in building a mining sector, but other people have been confused and say, well, Greenland is basically against mining. Can you help us here and explain what exactly is the stand when it comes to mining and foreign investors of your government?
Yes, I think the question is also very layered because the confusion is not in the entire industry. I know this because I have a lot of meetings with the mineral sector. It is very true that Greenland is pro-mining, and that's the general both political and public opinion. I've been traveling the country many times this year, and this is a question I'm always get. And what I detect is people are very interested in the mining sector. It's good job opportunities, and for the local businesses, it is a very vibrant and interesting area that they are already making money off. So they are also very interested. We are against uranium mining, and that there's a legislation on that. And for the industry, I think this is not uncommon. They recognize this from other jurisdictions as well, where there is diverse opinions on uranium mining. But of course, maybe in the investor environment, there can be more confusion as to what is this ban about? And we do try a lot to counter that narrative. Just last year, we made trips to several mining cities, such as Perth and Vancouver and Toronto, where we had meetings with different major companies and discussed with them the possibilities in Greenland. So we are trying to counter this perspective on Greenland being anti-mining. We are not, but we do have high standards. We do have high environmental standards. We do have tight regulation on both environment and labor. So yes, we are not a cheap country to do mining in, but we have a lot of other, I think, benefits going for us, such as the resource, which is of course the first and foremost area.
Thank you very much. And there are immediately questions from several journalists now. On the issue of China. It's been mentioned a couple of times already during this meeting. It's a controversial issue. Will Greenland allow investments in its minerals in the mining sector from Chinese companies? I know you have just issued, your government has just issued a new whole strategy on your foreign relations, including this question. But can you address us here and tell us, will you allow in the future investments from China in your minerals?
As for now, we don't have many investments from China. We have actually just maybe a minor partner in one of the projects. But our stand is that we will work with anyone who will adhere to our legislation, to our rules and regulations. But we are also as we speak, actually developing our investor screening law that will be put forward for the Greenlandic Parliament next spring. And I think many of the questions and discussions will come in regards to that. But because, of course, we will have the same reservations as you have seen in the European Union, where you also have the same sort of legislation in place. And also I think Denmark made one a couple of years ago, where you will screen investments for, you can say, geopolitical issues or security matters. And we will have the same in place from next year.
Does that basically mean that you do not really desire investments from China, or how do we read your signals here?
I think you should read that we are very much open to business, and we prefer to do business with the like-minded partners. That is why we have deepened our relationship with the European Union. That is why we are also having quite close relations to the United States of America, where we have a lot of cooperation as well, bilaterally, also in the mineral sector. But we are also focused on diversification of the Greenlandic economy. And does it come to that? Well, if people investing want to develop projects that adhere to our legislation and they happen to come from China, well, we will have to follow our own laws and regulations. So there are no rules against it for now.
Right. Thank you very much. There were already 3 people who asked this particular question. So it is of key interest, of course, to the media to have very clear answers from your government on this particular point. And I know some of the journalists will probably follow up directly with you afterwards. But let me turn to the other thing that you raised in this field, the question of hydropower and the green technologies that your government is now pursuing. What is the core business perspective that you think that Greenland is offering?
On hydropower?
Yes.
Well, in this case, we are sort of standing on the shoulders of other countries because we not have the muscles to develop the technology ourselves. So we are very much depending on other countries doing the research and the development of technology so that we can have a market for green fuels and so on. But when that threshold is made, we will have the potentials to develop green energy with hydropower. So we are trying to make ourselves available for that, both testing and later on projects. But it's not only for export we are thinking about this matter, because everybody is asking for sustainable mining, and also that includes a green mining profile for the project itself. And it is high energy projects. So also we're looking into how can we maybe make the profile of our local projects greener by using and harvesting this hydropower. So we are looking in different areas on that. I just want to mention something I think Thomas said about how much production can we have in Greenland. Greenland does not have a lot of production right now, not in the fisheries, not in the mining sector. And the question is that our aim? I'm not certain about that, because we already have low unemployment. We have a very small workforce. So for us, it's very important to make the money in the first chain of any sector, because then it leaves Greenland and we will most likely not benefit from it later on in the value chain. So, and the green projects such as hydropower, that's very good fit for us, because usually in the development of the project, the construction phase, it's very high intensive in terms of workforce, but it's not when it comes to the operating phase. And the operating phase doesn't require a lot of workforce, and that's why that's a good fit for us. So in regard to mining sector, projects does not necessarily has to be really, really big, because we will need to import the workforce anyhow. So smaller projects can also be of interest with a lower demand for workforce in the operating phase. So we have to think the entire way around, not just the production period, because for the Greenlandic side, we will need to fly a lot of the people in anyhow.
All right, Naja Nathanielsen, thank you once again. I have 2 final questions for you before we'll let you go. One is right in extension of what you just said. There's a question here. With the potential import of a lot of skilled manpower to run the mining companies that you are obviously looking to develop and looking forward to develop. How will you make sure that this also benefits the local population in the sense that your people will gain some skills, they will learn from the experience of the influx of foreign skilled labor? Is there legislation in place to secure that this does not become sort of a one-off, the mine workers come in from outside and then they leave and you are left only with, let's say, a hole in the ground? The future of the skilled labor force, of your labor force, how is that secured? That's question number one. And the final question is, with all this new cooperation with the EU, will Greenland and your government consider once again to join the EU that you left some 2, 3, 4 decades ago?
Well, let me start by answering the last question first. I think that's a question for my premier more than for me, but for now we're just welcoming you in with the office in Nuuk, Greenland, and let's leave it there for now. I think as it is, Greenland is more looking into developing partnerships with both the European Union and the United States of America as our primary partners. Also, we have some good relations with the UK and others. So yes. In regard to the workforce, for us in Greenland, it's not very uncommon to have people fly in to do work either for a short period of time or for a longer period of time. What is important and key is to secure the framework around it. And in regard to the mineral sector, there's an IBA in place. If there's a project, an IBA is impact benefit agreement between it's trilateral, it's the company, it's the municipality, and it's the government, where we try to define what is needed locally to feel a sense of that you gain something from the project. And it can be investments into culture or local infrastructure, whatever, really. There's no boundary to what we can make, what we can focus on in an IBA. Also, in the hearing process before a project, you very much involve the local municipality and the local communities. I just traveled around South Greenland twice this summer with companies to hold public meetings and discuss projects and talk to people, even the smallest settlements, to tell them about the projects. And wherever I go, really, there's an interest. There's a keen interest in both projects. From a workforce perspective, what kind of jobs can we get there? What kind of future? How long will you be operating? And these questions are very much in the center for the local population. So is this a project that we can count on for maybe 10 years? Is there good possibilities? Can we advance when we're in the project? And we facilitate that dialogue between the company and the population. And I think that's the way to go around it. You just need to be out there and engage with people, and they will respond.
Right, and you responded to our desire to have you on this meeting, and for that we're very, very grateful. Naja Nathanielsen, Naalakasuisok, or Minister for Raw Materials, Justice, Gender Equality, Business and Trade in Greenland, Nuuk. Naya, enjoy your day in New York, and don't be late for the meeting on Friday. I hope you have a nice meeting with van der Leyen in your hometown on Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very grateful for your participation. And we will, of course, wave as you leave the meeting during the next presentation, I believe. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you to all of you also.
And as I said, we will share the contact information of Naja Nathanielsen's government with you on your mails as soon as this meeting is over, or shortly afterwards at least. Let's turn to the geopolitical scenery in the Arctic. There is a worsening of Arctic cooperation. There's a crisis with Russia, of course, that has spilled over from the war in Ukraine into the Arctic. Jari Vilén is an expert on these matters. Presently, as I said earlier, the Finnish ambassador to Canada He's worked also as an ambassador in the Barents region for the Finnish government, working very closely with relations to Russia. He's a former Arctic advisor to the president of the EU Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. Jari Vilén, also thank you very, very much for you to share with us your morning in Canada. The next 8 minutes are yours, and I know you're going to tell us what you think of the actual international politics in the Arctic and how the EU's move into the Arctic fits into this picture. It's all yours, please.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to join you. And I really feel privileged to be able to participate today to this discussion. As you mentioned in the beginning, that I had a privilege to write a paper on the request of the President Juncker concerning the European Union future strategy in the Arctic. Actually, it was a gift to the President Juncker, to the new Commission. And I too hope that Thomas has the paper in his desk at the moment, because one of the suggestions in my paper was opening the EU Information Office for the Nuuk. So somehow I really feel that I'm one of the godfathers for the event that will happen on the Friday. And I'm really great to see that we are actually progressing on that direction. That paper was written in a time when the war was not in the horizon, or we could not even anticipate what would happen. But now in the hindsight, when I look in the paper and I was going through again my own notes in that and we're talking about today, the certain aspect, of course, you can already see in there. Of course, the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression has changed profoundly everything in the Arctic. The structures that we built are basically gone. Barents cooperation is now European cooperation. Arctic cooperation is very much through the Arctic Council cooperation between North America and Europe, even that there's some attempts to trying to maintain Russia part of that. And of course, as a consequence of Putin's aggression against the Ukraine, we have Finland, now finally also Sweden as a members of the NATO. So the geopolitical situation has profoundly changed also in the Arctic, which means that we are in a completely different kind of situation than we were before. What remains there is challenges concerning the climate change. The ice cap is melting. That's a self-evident fact, and we need to cooperate on that aspect as much as we can, and we have to have a common policy strategies in there. But the hard security questions are different, which are building now the resistance and building the response what Russia has been doing there for nearly 20 years, building the military build-up in there. And also, as mentioned in here, the critical raw materials and minerals will be absolutely crucial to our future policies. We are decoupling ourselves from the resources from China, resources from Russia, naturally, and it means that particularly the North America, Canada, one country where I'm representing at the moment, Finland, is one of the crucial partners for us for providing this. And of course, also Greenland is part of this package. To be able to successfully conduct the green transition that we all are aiming, we need to have this cooperation in a completely different manner than we even thought before what is there. Also, what is on the line pipeline is actually question of logistics and a question of security of supply. I don't think we've been discussing that too much in the previous decades, not that much maybe in the Cold War time, but actually one of the crucial issues for the future, for the security of the European Union, is trying to secure the logistical lines from the North America to Europe. And that, particularly for the Scandinavian countries, is absolutely crucial, that how we can secure that these logistical lines will be available there also in the future, in the time that they might be threatened for the various reasons. And which we haven't addressed that much, Martin, in this discussion, which I think is absolutely crucial, talking about the rights and privileges of indigenous people and peoples in that region. How do we find the balance of providing and guaranteeing the security that we want to do in a situation when we are absolutely needed to have these raw materials from territory and territories that we have in there. Canada is one of prime examples with reconciliation processes for the indigenous populations and trying to find the common ground for that. In that respect, I think in many issues, this is a strategic alliance that the European Union and Canada needs to do, particularly trying to find the delicate balance that what we need to do for future purposes in there. An interesting thing is to put in perspective to you, here in the North America, whether you talk for the Americans or the Canadians, Russia does exist, and threat in Russia is there in the European soil. But here, the threat and concerns about Arctic security is particularly about China. The fact that ice cap is melting will mean whatever we do in 2030s or 40s, the North Pole will be open for the seafarers. And the question is that the Chinese fleet, military fleet, is also able to get to the North Atlantic and the east coast of the North America. So there's a raise in awareness also of this changing situation in Canada and USA, and need to invest and to prepare for the changes that we have in the region as such. In a positive terms, and I'll try to be very brief on that, knowing the time constraint that we have. On the positive terms, the Arctic is back on the agenda. Everybody is interested in the Arctic, and the question is that how can we utilize this momentum to the best of the benefits in the Arctic region, in the interest of the people who live there, how to provide more services, how to provide more opportunities for their livelihood in there. There's a nice, I think this was a Norwegian Prime Minister actually who said it in one of his interviews, if there's no people, there's no security. If there's no security, there are no people. And I think this is a very good guideline saying that why we have to invest in the Arctic, how we have to secure the infrastructure, services provided in there, that we would have a people providing this security in the area that is so precious to all of us. And taking account, as I said, the Arctic is absolutely unique area to our world, and climate change in the Arctic is something that affects every single life in the Europe, in the world in there. So I'm very happy and grateful that President von der Leyen is going in there, because it is clear signal also her interest to the Arctic region and European Union Commission interest in there. And I sincerely hope that will be reflected also in the next Commission that we will have after the elections, because these are the long-term commitments that we need to do, long-term strategic plans that need to be done there. And that's something that we have to remember from the Chinese, that the Chinese perspective is not a quarter of 1 year or 4 years. They're talking about 20 or 30 years of planning and perceptions, what they're looking forward in there. So Arctic's on the agenda. We have a strategic interest in all of our partners to work on that. And we have to find the delicate balance for hard security, strategic raw materials, and of course, the rights and privileges to people who live in the region. Thank you, Martin. This is very brief from my side.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jari Vilén, Finnish ambassador to Canada. And I'll turn now to Per Haugaard, who is with me in the studio here in Copenhagen, head of the Danish the EU Commission's representation in Copenhagen, and ask you what exactly you think that Jari Vilén's perspective brings to us here. What exactly is it the EU brings to the Arctic? I mean, there is no, as you know, better than I do, the EU doesn't have an army, there's no navy you can send into the oceans in the north to safeguard things and to maintain peace there. So how does the EU's new approach to the Arctic, the opening of the office, play into this whole security dilemma in the Arctic? The Americans are beefing up, NATO is providing new plans for the Arctic. There is a military propulsion here. Even the Russians are gearing up. We're all talking about security in the Arctic. What does the EU bring into the security dilemma?
Thanks, Martin. Very good question, and thanks to Ambassador Vilén for his very good insights in this. We're opening an office. It's a very good step, I believe. It's very good news. As the ambassador said, it's something that's been in the works for quite some time. I am very happy that it's now happening under the watch of President von der Leyen. It shows that the EU and the European Commission is looking to the Arctic, is looking to the Northwest as a very strategic a very strategic area in this particular geopolitical time. So we will bring our offer of cooperation. We will signal in a clear way that we are going to build on the partnership that we already have with Greenland. As Thomas Bard said, we will seek to lift this partnership to the next level. We have much to offer in terms of technology, in also financing. We can help the Greenlandic society and new investors to de-risk their investment. The European Investment Bank has already, or is already, very active in that area. So the Commission, the European Investment Bank, can go in and de-risk with the aim of finding win-wins.
Yes. And so we're back to the win-wins that you mentioned, Thomas Baird. I hope I know you're still with us. So can I ask you, please, from Brussels to contribute to this part of the discussion, how the interests of the EU, the possible investments of the EU, the engagement of the EU plays into what we could call the hard security issues of the Arctic. There is a hard match here. It's sometimes hard to figure out what exactly is it the EU will contribute into something that is very much about military might and potential tensioning of a situation, if we call it like that, because I don't want to take the word conflict into my mouth when we talk about the Arctic, not yet anywhere.
Yeah, Martin, that's an interesting debate, but of course I want to go back to basics in a way from the European Union perspective and really think of ourselves as a project of peace and prosperity. So that is what was the vision more than 50 years ago when we started to speak about steel and coal, but it's still very much the vision today as we are confronted with a war on our eastern border. It is to see in what ways we can spread and support peace and prosperity on our continent with our partners, whether they're part of the European Union or not. And that is traditionally pursued through non-military means, of course. Trade, cooperation are very important ways to gel and to glue things together, very much like we did it in the early days on steel and on coal. But we've spoken a lot about sort of the shifts and the shocks that we're seeing in this geopolitical global world right now. You must have seen how the European Union is mainstreaming security right now as an overall concept. And President von der Leyen is certainly doubling down on defense as also an industrial policy tool to increasingly support also the military efforts in which Ukraine is involved in. It is defending its territory and its sovereign rights. So yes, you're totally right. The European Union doesn't come first and foremost with military might. We come with peace and prosperity. That's our recipe for kind of bringing partners together around the world in sharing those values. But in doing so, we also come with a lot of allies, whether they come as part of the G7, whether they come as part of NATO and others. So for us, it's certainly keeping our ear close to the ground in Greenland is certainly also a way for us to kind of activate our network and work with those allies. As I'm sure 10 years from now, we will be operating in a very different mode and mindset, perhaps. This is an area where there's a lot of developments, and I certainly expect a lot more as we are kind of mainstreaming security. There was one interesting thing that the Greenland minister also mentioned, which is a very live discussion here in Brussels, and we often refer to economic security. The question was raised about, for example, can the Chinese invest in Greenland? And obviously, I cannot speak for Greenland, but it certainly is an issue that we're looking at. Per already mentioned the key word that we're using here, which is de-risking. We tend to look a lot at risks around the world. It doesn't mean that we're decoupling as such, but we are trying to address risks wherever they exist in a very proportionate and in a very precise manner. And so that means we want to manage our relationship. We want to be very careful in not developing any unwanted dependencies like the one we had on Russian fossil fuels, for example. So I would say a lot of the debate in general is also being pursued through some economic means. And so creating that security, mainstreaming that security, I see that certainly as a debate in which the European Union is stepping up its game very, very much, and in which I hope we will be able to also further support our partners like Greenland in the future.
Thank you very much, Thomas Baird, also for making it clear to us that security, of course, has very many dimensions. Let me go back to you, Jari Viléen in Ottawa, on still stepping on the issue of hard security in the Arctic. As you know better than I, the Arctic Council is struggling at the moment to keep its own coherence, to maintain Russia as a full-scale member of the Arctic Council. They have already left the Euro-Barents Council, and they're threatening to leave also the Arctic Council, which is, of course, the most preeminent governmental level cooperative body of the Arctic. Should we expect worse in the Arctic? Will the conflict in Ukraine, the crisis between the Western countries and Russia, will that increase also in the Arctic? Are we looking into an Arctic where Russia is no longer part of, let's say, the common cooperation of the Arctic?
Well, the Arctic Council is trying to find its own path on this situation. As you probably are well aware, that they are looking for the formulation where in certain setup, the Russia could be participating in written format on the procedures. But the fact, of course, is that in Arctic Council, we have the Sweden, Finland, Denmark, for example, countries who are also members of the European Union. And we are also bound by our common decisions in the European Union concerning how to behave with Russia. And that includes, for example, excluding Russian participation in international structures and organizations. So we're looking for the certain specific arrangements in there to be able to maintain certain level of communication and dialogue. And for example, both in Arctic Council and Barents Council, what is still valid is agreement concerning rescue services and also, of course, the nuclear security. And I think these are the elements that I would like to see to maintain in there, particularly for our common interest, what we have. What and how we can proceed in the future, I think, is a billion-dollar question, what it is. And I think one day there will be time to initiate the dialogue also with Russia, definitely not at the moment. I think the question on environment is the issue, that it is a global challenge to all of us. It's a global issue where hopefully we can find the common ground. For example, just sharing the data, what we have concerning the changes, what happens in the Arctic area. But I'm afraid I don't have a clear answer. It is something that we have to discuss every day. What are the levels of cooperation must be kept with Russia, at the same time making sure that we have unified policy towards Russian aggressions and policies, what they are doing in there. What the European Union, if you allow me to say just one word on that, I'm very much looking forward to also the new commission which coming in the autumn and their overall policy towards the Arctic. I know that this is a discussion which is ongoing there. We actually have the joint communication, which has been on the table for a couple of years. And I'm sure that we have to come back to that joint communication between the member states, at least in the new commission time, which is the communication basically on the time when the war is ongoing there. And what I sincerely would like to see is, of course, that also the financial elements of the European Union could be seen more coherently in the Arctic. There's a certain finances, for example, the Greenland has been mentioned in here. We have finances concerning the green transition, but some kind of coherence on the Arctic policies and using especially the muscle what the European Union have. It's a financial muscle, but it's also muscle, as you said, led by the example. And I think this is extremely important when we talk about the Arctic. And I think came from the minister's comments too, that when we talk about extracting the raw materials, minerals, we are leading by example, having the highest standards in the world. We are taking care of the best in the world about our indigenous population rights and privileges. And I think this lead by example also in the Arctic cooperation is something that I'm looking forward very much in the future.
Thank you very much. And let me make it clear now to all our participants out there, all the journalists who are watching this webinar, participating. Thank you for your questions so far. I will invite you now to write any questions you have on your mind, any comment, any questions you have to the three remaining panelists here. Thomas Baird from the Commission, part of von der Leyen's cabinet, here to speak also on behalf, no, not on behalf of, but about von der Leyen's visit to Greenland and the opening of the EU office there on Friday. Jari Vilén, an expert on the geopolitics of the Arctic, and Per Haugaard here next to me, who is head of the representation, the EU representation in Copenhagen. So please write your questions on your website or on your computer, send it to us. Remember your name and your affiliation, and the question will pop up on my screen here. Meanwhile, while you formulate your questions, I'll turn to you, Per, and pick on a topic that was brought up just now by Jari Vilén in Ottawa of the EU's financial muscles.
Yes.
Those are well known, of course. A very important feature of the Commission and the EU as such is the ability to raise rather impressive amounts of money when the political will is there. So speaking of money, when von der Leyen arrives in Nuuk Thursday night, or when she meets with the government of Greenland on Friday morning in Nuuk, what kind of, let's say, new money does she bring to the table?
First of all, let's not forget that, like you mentioned, the EU is already contributing quite significantly to the Greenlandic economy under the so-called OCT decision. The EU is transferring around 225 million euros between 2021 and 2027. That is a significant amount. In addition to that, the EU is paying around 20 plus million every year for fishing rights. So that's a significant amount of money, which traditionally has gone into the financing of the Greenlandic educational system, but there are other areas on which we can cooperate. When von der Leyen will visit Nuuk on Friday, she will sign 2 new agreements, one on education and one on green growth. And the green growth sort of agreement will be of an amount of around 22 million euros, which really signals that the new areas on which we would like to focus is the green transition. How can we achieve win-wins in this area? We both have an interest in the green transition. Nowhere else in the world is climate change as visible as in Greenland. Mm-hmm. So we have a shared interest and a shared responsibility. The minister mentioned the project regarding hydropower. This is a fantastic potential for intensified cooperation where European industry, technology can bring such projects to fruition, coupled with de-risking financial capability from the EU and from the European Investment Bank. So these are areas where we can cooperate. So yes, we are coming to Nuuk with a vision of enhanced cooperation in areas of mutual interest, and most importantly, in the green transition.
And just perhaps an impertinent question. Is this simply the EU competing with the US? The US, as many will know, they reopened their consulate in Nuuk about 4 years ago. President Trump famously suggested that the US would even buy Greenland. I think that suggestion has now been killed. But we all know that the US has a very great security interest in the Arctic and in Greenland in particular, and they have invested somewhat in also civil projects over the last couple of years. So is this a situation of competition with the US?
No, this is not a situation of competition. This is a situation of enhanced partnership. The US is our most important and most strategic partner and also ally. And so we're looking forward to working with the US and with the US administration also on issues regarding Greenland. They have a presence there. We are now also getting a presence there. So we're looking forward to working on the ground on also projects of common interests.
Yes. And thank you. I have a question here from the national broadcaster in Greenland. There's a question from one of my colleagues at KNR, the national broadcaster in Greenland, to you, Thomas Baird in Brussels. I know this is not an easy question to ask or to answer for a diplomat like yourself, but the question really is, how do you or how does the EU Commission perceive the level of, let's say, engagement from Greenland in the EU? It may be that the EU is now very vividly demonstrating its own interest in Greenland. Do you feel that there is a great deal of interest and engagement from Greenland in the EU and the partnership that you have?
I'm not sure if that's such a hard question, but I do appreciate the question for being raised, Martin. I think it goes back to this very idea that any relationship, for it to work, needs to be a two-way street and needs to be win-win. So as we are putting forward our offer, let's say, and our commitments to the Arctic more generally and to Greenland specifically, we are certainly, we feel welcomed. We feel that there is a strong interest in this partnership and that we can contribute to our partner. to be very clear, the question I think came up earlier. This is not about being part of the European Union. On the contrary, this is about a partner that is part of Europe, but not part of the European Union, and that we are trying to stay close to and make sure that we have this this cooperation on joint interests. So I definitely think there is a lot of interest. We feel very welcomed to visit Greenland, and I think we heard the offer also being made today. So very much looking forward to that, and this is very much a partnership. Maybe in that context, there's one thing I can mention, because of course this is an EU visit, but in the very beginning you also mentioned that we will be joined by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and of course we have 27 member states, and Denmark in particular is extremely supportive of that closer relationship. So for us, it's certainly, and we do that very often, that we travel together in what we tend to call Team Europe, this idea that we have a joint outreach. So we're very pleased to also receive the support from Copenhagen for what is an EU office and an EU mission. So Prime Minister Frederiksen is joining us, and that is very welcome. But this is indeed an EU mission that is being led by the Commission President von der Leyen, as mentioned. So full win-win and positive support, I would say, from all sides for this closer relationship.
Thank you very much. And that also almost answers another question that has come in on my screen from Sweden, which is, I think, Pierre, you might be in position to answer this. There are still a complicated relationship between Greenland, which is part of the Danish kingdom. The government in Copenhagen has still some power over Greenland, to put it very briefly. So how does the EU make sure not to complicate further the Danish-Greenlandic relationship here? I think you get the gist of this question. This is a very complicated diplomatic situation where the EU could be played in different ways, either by the government in Denmark or by the government in Nuuk to further either one's interest.
No, I think you have to look at this in a very pragmatic way. We have been working extremely well with the Danish government, and we've been working extremely well with the Greenlandic government on this issue, and we will continue to do so in the future. This is not about history, this is about the future. And as Thomas has said, this is about enhancing this partnership and signaling that Greenland, although not part of the European Union, belongs to the European family, and vice versa. So this is the positive and sort of future-oriented vision that we want to see this with.
And Jari, I could take this one step further and say there have been certain forces in the Arctic, including some of the indigenous peoples, including Russia and previously also Canada, who were opposed to a greater EU role in the Arctic. For many different reasons, there has been, let's say, some hesitation in inviting the EU into the Arctic. The EU is not today an observer within the Arctic Council, has never been invited, even though it has tried for decades to become an observer within the Arctic Council. So there has been some turmoil, and it's been a long, long journey for you to now finally open an office in the Arctic. So how do you see your situation, the EU Commission's situation in the Arctic? Are you actually welcome there? Or are you wedging your way in through a tiny capital of a tiny nation of Greenland?
I think this, of course, should be answered by the Commission. I used to serve for the Commission, but no longer I'm representing more the national interest. But let me put this way, because now reflection from Canadian side, European Union is extremely welcome partner. I think the fact that the war and the global changes has profoundly changed also the perception in here. I just actually had the Nordic ambassador's mission to the Saskatchewan and Manitoba, talking to local premiers there and talking local politicians. And European Union is now seen as a key partner for the strategic alliance that we're building. There's a great interest and understanding about the value of these critical raw materials, what they play in our global scene, and especially for our common green transition. So the situation has changed. And as I mentioned, I think there's some more raising awareness about particularly for the values what the European Union reflects in here. As we've been, I think all of us has been saying exactly the same thing. European Union is leading by the examples. When you're talking about extracting these minerals, it will be done what is the best possible manner in the world today with using the technology and trying to be as environment conscious as possible. And the second thing, as I said also, is that also the awareness and concerns about indigenous population rights and privileges is a self-evident fact in the European Union. So I do feel, and I feel the discussions I've been having here in Canada, for example, that there's a different kind of atmosphere today to proceed in. And I'm looking forward very much for the future, what we're coming in there, that sometime the war also has this kind of effects that the alliances that has been there forever, like the North America and Europe, somehow become stronger, and you can actually see the vision and purposes more clearly. And I think we are now in the situation. The visit, for example, is one testimony that we have a clearer common view and assessment how we should proceed and what are our global targets and what we're trying to achieve together.
Right, thank you very much. Thomas, there's a question come in for you from a Danish colleague who would like to ask you to what extent you expect that the European Commission will be receiving, or businesses in Europe will be receiving, critical raw materials from Greenland, including uranium, before the year 2030?
I don't have the exact timeline here, but I think it is fair and important to go back to our earlier discussion and stress how we are at the early stages of unlocking that potential of bilateral cooperation in Greenland in particular, between Greenland and the European Union in critical raw materials. That is actually very similar to a lot of the work that we have started doing inside the European Union itself, with some, for example, reserves discovered in Kiruna, Sweden. We are working with member states across our union to make sure that we have further development of those critical raw materials as part of a strategy and a sort of a piece of legislation, actually, that was adopted in March of last year. So we're in this for the long haul, and I think that point on critical raw materials clearly underscores that this is not about a quick win or a quick fix in any way, without being able to speak to the specific timeline of when we can expect the flow of critical raw materials from Greenland. I think the stage that we're in is very much about investment and infrastructure in the first place, and setting up that business with that startup, let's say, support that the ministers spoke so clearly about. And then, of course, as you focus on the roots, the fruits will follow. So I think that is how we see it, but it's clearly something for the long haul, and it will take a lot of time in Greenland, as it will take a lot of time within the European Union. So a lot of the reserves that are being discovered and right now are only going to be operational in years from now. That is very clear.
Thank you very much for that. It doesn't sound very likely that there's a whole lot happening before 2030. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I don't think it's entirely fair, but I think a lot is happening. I mean, even this year, as mentioned, we will have a big business delegation going to Greenland. I think it's right now on the back of the signature of the partnership on critical raw materials last November. It is about moving the mark and making things real, getting active through those investments and breaking ground quite literally in Greenland also to make this happen. The key thing to bear in mind is that this is a very complex undertaking anywhere around the world, and certainly in Greenland. And so in that sense, we need to follow this over time. I appreciate that there's, of course, interest in seeing the very concrete output that we're all hoping for and looking for. That is taking more time. But in the short term, I would still invite everyone to look at the real steps that are being taken here with the investments, with the projects that are coming online. and that will then over time lead to the results that we want and that we look for.
Thank you, Thomas. I have 1 or 2 questions left on my screen here. I urge you all participants to send your questions now before we close this webinar in not too long from now. But I have 1 or 2 questions left. One is for you, Jari, from a colleague from Denmark who's asking you as the Finnish ambassador to Canada or representative of Finland, the fact that the EU now has an office in Greenland, will that in any way change the way that Finland addresses Greenland and Denmark in the Arctic context?
Not at all. As been describing here, this is a European Union initiative. What is there? We have our bilateral relations with Denmark, Kingdom of Denmark, and of course, as part of that, also the Greenland. But we are fully supporting, of course, this initiative by the European Union, seeing that's important, building the strategic alliances that has been mentioned in there. And of course, personally, I would like to say that it would be really nice to see also the Finnish person in this office in the future. For example, one of our indigenous population persons in there, because something which I'm looking forward, not just be talking so much about security and raw materials and strategy, but I think which is value too is also that we have a unique indigenous population, the Sami population in the European Union side. We have indigenous population in Greenland, and also here in Canada, numerous indigenous populations. That this is just my small wish. I would also see that this Office of European Union could also focus about these unique cooperation opportunities that we can have between indigenous population of the European Union and Greenland.
Uh-huh. And can I have one question left for Thomas before I turn with a final question to you, Per. Thomas, there is a question here from a colleague that we have seen previous high-level EU visits to Greenland. There was Prodi, who visited in the year 2000. Barroso was there in 2007. I seem to remember a vice president of the Commission back in 2012 and so forth. Is there any difference this time around? How would you, let's say, differentiate between the upcoming visit on Friday by von der Leyen with the previous high-level EU visits to Greenland?
Martin, I would really look at the world around us and see how much that world has changed. We said it in geopolitical terms, obviously, in terms of climate change, which is the biggest threat to the Arctic overall, and to Greenland as well. So the world around us has really changed us, and that has changed ourselves to a large extent. We're looking at partners differently. We always valued our partners, but as I mentioned earlier, partnerships now come really at a premium. We need to find ourselves at the right side of history, and we want to do that with as many of our friends around the world. So there's a full appreciation for this. There's an overall doubling down on partnerships. And that really means that we are looking beyond the specific issues that we may or may not have been discussing in the past. We're looking really at the full breadth and the extent of the relationship. And there's no better way to do that by opening an office now. So I really see a deepening and widening, if you wish, of the relationship in a changing geopolitical context. And of course, I'm speaking only for the European Union, but we do see and appreciate that in Greenland itself, there are these clear orientations that make our partners also partner with us and look for us as much as we look for them in this global world. So those are, my view, the very clear contextual changes that we're seeing. The tools that we're deploying now are becoming even more precise and specific than they were before. And of course, I really have to stress, I mean, the president has been, is in a very intense time of her political life, and has been appointed as a lead candidate for her own political family. I'm not on the campaign staff, to be very clear. But in that very busy schedule, she still finds it very, very important now to travel the wider neighborhood and to really pass these messages. So that, I think, really speaks to the importance that we attach to Greenland, to the Arctic, and to making sure that we keep our partners close and we unleash the potential of our partnerships.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And Pierre, let us finalize this webinar by going back to the basics. On Friday, Ursula von der Leyen will visit Nuuk. She will sign a couple of agreements, new agreements, as you deliberated on earlier on, and she will open finally the EU Commission's first actual office in the Arctic region. So very, very basically, what will this office look like? How many people will be employed? What will they do?
Well, it's a very, very nice office in a very, very nice building in the old part of Nuuk, just next to Hans Ege's house, with a beautiful view. It'll be open for business as of Friday. We will send you the address following this webinar. It will be staffed by 4 people, all very highly motivated colleagues who will be there to listen and to explain and to be open for business, as I said, be the bridgehead and talk about the full spectrum of things that the EU and the Arctic at large have on their agenda. And that includes people-to-people exchanges, culture, education, research, and so on. So we are very much looking forward to seeing this very nice place open.
So this raises in my head a basic question. Is this an EU Arctic office, or is this an office that the EU has in Greenland to deal with Greenlandic issues and assistance to the cooperation with Greenland? Or if one has a question on the EU's work with indigenous peoples in North America, would you then contact that particular office, or would you talk to people in Brussels?
Martin, it's both. It's an office which will focus a lot on EU Greenlandic issues, but it's also a wider, more geopolitical office. It's the EU window to the Arctic and vice versa. So I would say that it is both, and it really signals the EU's commitment and very strong interest in the Arctic at large.
Well, then the EU, we have an issue in Denmark with who is appointed to Arctic offices of the Copenhagen government. The Greenlanders, they want people from Greenland to be appointed to high-level positions within the kingdom and so forth. So I'm asking you, is there a policy then to make sure that there are actually Arctic indigenous peoples employed in this office?
This has been subject to some discussion between us and the Greenlandic government, and this is not excluded, and this would even be welcome. If we were to employ such experts, they would of course have to come to Brussels to be part of the Commission staff, and then be trained to be, diplomats and so on, and then sent back to Nuuk, duly representing the European Commission, but with an expertise in this particular area.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, what do you see happening next? Now, on Friday, 4 people will be working full-time, let's say projecting EU interests and partnerships in the Arctic and in Greenland, of course, in particular. What then happens? How will we see results?
Well, I think that these 4 people will be very busy. I think that once President von der Leyen has seen the beauty and the potential of Greenland, she will return to Brussels full of enthusiasm, and this will contaminate the college of commissioners, and I would also guess the new Commission. So I think that these 4 people will be very busy receiving business delegations, commissioners, to show the EU Greenland and to show Greenland the EU.
Mm-hmm. And ladies and gentlemen, with those words, I'd like to thank Thomas Bert in Brussels very much. Thank you very, very much for your time, Thomas, and your very valuable input. I wish you a happy day in Brussels, and to Jari Vilén, the same to you. Thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise, your insight, and your time in Ottawa. I wish you a happy morning there. I believe it still is. And to you, Pierre, thank you very, very much. And to all of you out there, thank you for your interest, and stay with us. Keep checking your mail. There will be some data there for you, contacts for the EU office in Nuuk, and for the proper entry point to the government of Greenland. Thank you also, in her absence, of course, to Minister Naja Nathanielsen from the Greenlandic government, who had to leave the meeting a little bit ago. Thank you very much for now. Goodbye.